Folks, welcome to another phenomenal episode. You're watching or listening to this episode. Today's amazing guest. Yes, it's not a solo one. This is dual guest. We have Ludovic and Colton, who are co-founders of Kickass UX, right? Which is one of the premier programs that helps you break into the field of UX. So here's what happened. I want to say December 2020 or something like that. In 2020, I had found out about Kickass UX and I had enrolled in their free email course. And because at that time I was doing something similar on email marketing and campaigns. So it's very, very well done. And I had a brief exchange with their co-founder Ludovic, and then I was like, you know what? One point, I would love to interview these folks. They're really cool people. And then literally about a month ago, Colton messaged me and said that, hey, our Kickass community found your Design MBA podcast valuable. Would you want to collaborate? And it's like this thing that I put out in the universe 2 years ago is finally materializing. So I am super excited, Ludovic and Colton, to have you both on the show.
Super excited to be here too. Thank you so much.
So stoked to be here.
And for all of you listening in, today what we're going to be specifically talking about is, as a graphic designer, how do you break in to the field of UX? That's going to be our main focus of conversation for today. So yeah, super stoked this is happening.
Us too.
Super stoked too. Can't wait. Let's do this.
So you know, one of the things I've heard from a few graphic designer friends is UX gig pays way more than a graphic design gig.
Yeah.
True or no?
True.
Absolutely
true. By a good margin.
100% true.
Yeah. I want to say it's like, if you look at the differences on like pay scale or the other ones I can't think about, Glassdoor, all that stuff, it works out to being like $55,000 in the United States for a graphic designer. It was the average salary. And then it's like 89 to 96, depending on the day you look, for a UX designer average salary. Now, I don't want like that to go out and like, if you're a graphic designer out there and you're thinking, oh my God, I'm going to get $96,000 like from day one. It's like, no, like to be perfectly candid, my first UX role, I was making $65,000 out of the gate. And I still think that was amazing, but like, it's just not always the way it works out. But yes, in general, UX designers usually make significantly more.
Yeah.
Oh my
God. Big time. Like it can be 2x, it can be like 25% more. And it really depends. It's a bit all over the place. But especially as tech exploded in the past few years, right? It feels like when Colton and I joined, salaries were even lower for UX, but they've increased so much in recent years, right? So when Colton, you were saying like I used to make 65Ks, that's back a few years ago. But just because of how tech exploded, now if you get 65K as an entry-level UX designer, wow, it's really low actually. You should be asking for more. So that's telling, right? And then yeah, it's true, graphic designer like 45, 55, 60 maybe max, and good luck getting higher than that. Yep.
Also, and that's a significant amount of difference for sure. I'm also thinking that, do you think that there are more UX jobs out there than there are graphic design jobs in general?
I don't know if actually that's true or not, because there's a need for both. I do know that there, like when I last looked on at least, I want to say it was Glassdoor, and looking across, whatever the other, Indeed, like looking at across a couple of these, there was like 10 to 15,000 UX jobs that were listed at the time. Now, to be fair, I didn't go through each page to verify that all of them were there, but at least the results were showing 10 to 15,000 jobs, something like that. I didn't make the same search for graphic design. I suspect there's a lot of graphic design jobs out there, but like, as I'm sure most graphic designers know, the quality of those jobs is going to vary greatly, and the quality of the stakeholders you're going to have to deal with is going to be all over the place.
Yeah, a big difference between graphic design and UX in terms of jobs is the growth of UX just exploded. Since 2008, the amount of jobs in UX, like the amount of people that say that the UX designers on LinkedIn grew by 212 times. It's gigantic, right? So it's like a steep curve like this. Graphic design, yeah, for sure. There are a lot of graphic designers out there. There are a lot of jobs. Yet the growth where it's not there, right? Like there is not that strong momentum like you can see in UX. So are you going to be able to find a job as a graphic designer? Oh, absolutely. Especially if you're really, really good at it and you went past the phase of being just a junior, right? But UX is way, way, way different. Obviously, both are very competitive, especially UX nowadays. There's so much more competition, so many more applicants. So things have changed there too, right? Yet, Colton have many strategies to get around that, and that's what we teach our students on how to truly stand out and how to come up with a positioning that helps them get that job in a way that is very different, very unique, and very personal to each designer.
Absolutely. Both of you collectively have mentored so many folks, especially graphic designers, helped them break into the UX design field. And I'm curious to know let's just talk about what are the challenges that graphic designers face when it comes to entering or breaking into the UX field.
I think one of the biggest challenges that they face is overconfidence might not be the right term, but I mean, there are a lot of crossovers between graphic design and UX as far as skill sets, right? Like the thing that's really great and what makes it very applicable for graphic designers, visual designers, web designers, all them to transition into UX is they have the visual side down, or at least they should. So you don't need to be talking about typography and color choices and whatnot, and or you don't have to do it as much. I think the big difference is with UX, like you're typically using a lot less color, so that's a new thing. But coming back around to the first point, which is it's not quite overconfidence, but they have a misunderstanding of what UX is fundamentally, I think. And it doesn't, they think that because they have this one set of skills that everything applies and that they can do the job from day one. And I can't tell you how many people have come through our program and they literally, you can see the testimonials on our site or talk to our previous students. They'll say, I had this previous idea of what UX was, only to find out I was way wrong and there was so much more to it than I thought. And like that's how I think a lot of graphic designers come about this. And one of the problems that I think is happening is I think companies are so desperate to find UX talent that that startups and other small companies end up hiring some of these junior designers, like aspiring UX designers who don't have a lot of haven't built their expertise. And so they end up hiring people who are graphic designers who still don't have the full skill set. And so I would say one of the biggest problems for graphic designers is, again, it's not overconfidence, but it's something like that, where they think they know what UX is. They think that all of their skill set applies, and it's not the case. Like building software, which is the majority of the use case or majority of the jobs out there for UX designers, is very different than just about every other job that you'll have. It's just so different. But I know Ludovic has more to chime in on other issues.
No, I love this discussion. At the end of the day, it's true that even like the difference between graphic design and UI itself, if you were to just let UX completely go out of the picture, right? UI and graphic design are very similar things that go for them, right? In terms of typography, the contrast, the hierarchy, the amount of space you allocate in between elements, all these things are given. They just have different canvases, different ways of displaying that. Yet, even though those like super hyperarching principles are similar and the same for both, they're applied in a very specific way, in very different ways. So you don't make the same typographic choice in UI design that you would in graphic design. And that kind of requires a little bit of retraining. But at the end of the day, because they're graphic designers, they just grasp it real quick, right? So that's why we don't spend much time teaching these things. But we go in depth, though, in UI, because we know that they're trained to think of typography, spacing, color in a different way than it needs to be for UI design to be done successfully, right? So, but yeah, overconfidence, Colton, you're right. Like confidence that, I know what I'm talking about. I can produce some beautiful visuals. I can make it all look good, and not realizing that making something look good is just the end 25% of the UX process, and the first 75% is all about, do I understand my problem correctly? How do I know that is the right problem? What are all the solutions that I try to figure out in order to solve the problem the best? How do we know that it is the best? What did I prototype? All these things, right? Like That's 75% of UX. And the misconception just comes along at the end, 25%, that sure, it matters. Otherwise, your application will look like hell, which you don't want. Yet, that 75% is fundamental to creating an experience that will be used by millions of users in a way that matters, that is meaningful, that is useful, that is navigable, all the adjectives you can find, right? And that doesn't come off just like that by, oh, I know graphic design. No, it's like there are a lot of methodologies before you can make an informed guess that your solution actually solved the right problem.
Ludovic just had this phenomenal point that I just like my brain like exploded when I heard that. Is like when I think about graphic design, it's like someone might have like a confidence that I know how to use my tool. Like I know how to use Illustrator. I know how to use this design tool. And like you said, I can create beautiful artifacts. But then that first 75% as part of the UX journey, which is like, you might need to create a user persona. You might need to create a wireframe. You might need to create a prototype, show it to your team members, do some user research, do some user testing to kind of make sure like, is this the right problem? First of all, is this the right problem? And then is this the right way to solve this problem?
Yeah.
Like both are different things, like, because you could be solving the wrong problem. That's an issue. And secondly, is this the best way also to solve that problem? Which I think is a little bit different in graphic design, where it's like you're just showing a client sometimes a couple of different options and they have to pick from which one they like more.
Yeah,
it's more subjective,
absolutely.
Right? It's more like around taste, around what we like, what we don't like in graphic design. And that's also the frustration of graphic designers, right? Because they spend hours and hours and hours creating something. And then the stakeholder, whether it's a manager, whether it's a client, whatever it is, right? They just come out with very, very subjective ways of defining what they think look good and doesn't look good. And a lot of graphic designers we've talked to, they, after many years of hearing that back and forth, they just start losing passion, even though they still love being creative every single day. It just like takes a toll on you when you know that as a practice, it's all based on principles, yet all of these principles yield are perceived very differently depending on the type of person. And someone might love something and another one might just find it hideous, right? So it's very hard to close the gap. And in UX, we close the gap through data and through actually testing things and making sure that the user is kind of that third-party entity, if you may, that is almost like a decision maker, right? That helps designer not feel like they have all the weight on their shoulder and have the responsibility to come out with beautiful, crazy, efficient designs. No, it's like, yeah, for sure, there is in part on the designer, and the user is there to help you get there, alongside with obviously stakeholders and so on and so forth. But you're not alone in UX. Like you have a lot of co-creators with you.
Yes, it's not a solo boat.
Yeah,
definitely not a solo boat. And kind of coming back to the original question about like problems in terms of like UX, graphic designers making it into UX, this kind of goes exactly in line with what Ludovic is talking about, is the change in process, right? Because previously, like for a graphic designer, visual designer, like at this point we've talked to hundreds of them, and so we know their problems pretty intimately at this point. And with their process, kind of how it goes is they're given a brief of some kind, or they have a problem that they have to solve, like design something. They go into their creative mode, their creative cave, and they just go heads down on this thing, and they come up with a bunch of different ideas. They solidify on one, and then they make all the final designs most of the time, and then they present those designs to their stakeholder, and the stakeholder might like it, they might hate it. You don't really know, and like there's not much you can do, because like to Ludovic's point is all they're really saying is like, from these visual design principles, this is why this makes sense. And from my opinion, this is why this composition is the way it is and why it should be this way. And the other person, the other stakeholder can just say, I don't like it that way. I pay your salary. Get that out of here. And so like
the creative director, the art director is like, yes or no.
Yeah, exactly. And there's really not much you can do about it, like at that point. Whereas like the change in process is with UX and like the UX process, it's really about iteration, and it's like they're much smaller loops. So like if you think about that, what process we just talked about with graphic design, it's one large loop where essentially you go from point A start, point Z or whatever, where you present your designs, and if they don't like it, you end up back at the beginning in this really, really large loop. Whereas in UX, it's like, okay, I had this problem, and then you're like framing the problem, really making sure you're going to the right thing, going towards the right problem, and then like you're working with stakeholders, and it's a small loop right there because everyone's involved in that like decision right there, and then you move to the next piece, and it basically it's these small loops. And of course, like, nothing is ever linear in UX, so you might be jumping back and forth between different points, but you're including your team throughout the entire point, and you're not moving up to the final visual design without everyone seeing it first. At least you shouldn't be. And just like the entire process is just a very, very different thing than what graphic designers are used to. So that's also a big hurdle. It's just understanding what that process looks like, how it feels, and also how you include team members along for the ride.
It's like, instead of like when I think about my day-to-day design work, like I have to take the whole team with me, like multiple different people. Like I have to show the concepts to engineering to kind of see, is there any feasibility or technical issues that might be implementing this design by this timeline. I have to also show those designs early on to product managers, like, are this solving the business goals, right? So the answer is never like, oh, this design is not approved or not going to be done because I don't like it or whatever. There's multiple different reasons. Like it's not meeting some goal or something like that.
Yeah, right. Maybe you could say the same thing about graphic design, right? Like the reason why they hire someone to do X work in graphic design or in web design or all these other jobs is because there is an initial business goal, right? But yet, like the end deliverable is visual focused. It's like either it's going to look good, it's going to look on brand, it's going to look whatever adjective you want to put on there. In UX, it is a mix of the UI and obviously the experience. Does it meet the business goal for sure? The technical feasibility. Are users able to use it, to navigate it well? Does it solve their problems? So there are a bit more moving pieces, and the end deliverable sure is UI at the end of the day, but UI is just like the top cherry on the cake, right? It's just a little bit of it. It's just the visual representation of it, but all the work behind it, all the navigation, all the flows, all these things, this is like raw UX. And this is the stuff that almost like looks invisible if you don't really think about it, yet is like the big part of the job. And in graphic design, even though they still also have business objectives, sometimes some technical limitations, sure, yet at the end of the day, it's going to be a visual representation. And that subjectivity is really hard to get rid of. And in UX, we can bring up a whole lot more than just the UI side of things, like we said.
And something I just thought about is, like, as a graphic designer, someone might have to create a lot of artifacts for marketing or something like that, and they're creating those artifacts, right? They might look at some of the things for inspiration. When it comes to UX, and if you're working as a UX designer in a decent sized company or a big company, most of the Fortune 500 companies have their own design systems. Yeah. So it's like, you don't necessarily have to worry about the UI part or the visual part that much, because it's like you have this Lego blocks of like all these elements and different things that you can already reuse to come up with it. And most of your time is going to be spent on the problem solving.
Good point. A super good point. I mean, yeah, you're right. Design systems are like playing Legos. Who knows what AI is going to do to this thing, right? Because you can so many possible things. But at the end of the day, design systems are, those components that designers pull from. And you're right, like they don't even have to make any UI decision in some companies at all, unless they have to create a brand new component that doesn't exist. And there is some sort of use case as to like, oh, wow, we didn't think about this. It doesn't exist. The current components don't let me solve the problem in the way that I would like to. Therefore, we might need to create something. And then there is a discussion between the design system team and the UX designer, try to figure out if like, do we actually need another component here, or could they be using something that currently exists? Even though it might require a few little changes in the overall screen, the UI, the flow, whatever it is, right? But you're 100% right. Like if you work as a UX designer in a company that has a very well-established design system, then you don't even have to worry about the UI at all.
And since we talked about all this, one of the things I've kind of heard from friends who used to be before a graphic designer and now working in the UX field is this change in working. Like when they worked at, let's say, a design agency and they're doing graphic design work, the client's paying for their time. So there's already buy-in. They just go and create the artifacts, and that's it. And then they show it, and there's a deadline, and that's it. Or even if they're in a graphic department or a graphic design job in a big company, they have to create this design. That's it. Versus now, when they are working in the UX field, I think something I've noticed that they struggle with is this whole idea of like, oh, I gotta like get a buy-in from engineering. Like I gotta show these designs to engineering, make sure that they like the design and stuff. So I've noticed that there's a little bit of that struggle, like working in that bigger team capacity versus just this like solo, like working on your own kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, as a graphic designer, like you are going to work cross-functionally with some teams to get deliverables out to them. So like with the sales team or with marketing or with whoever you're on, like obviously they're usually embedded in marketing, but it depends. Like they do work cross-functionally, but these other teams like don't have to provide their feedback necessarily. It's someone else who's like signing off on the final deliverable. Whereas in UX, like you are working with those teams. I think one of the things that I know people struggle with is the communication of functionality, and especially with graphic designers, like understanding, like you're moving from designing a static screen that has no interaction to something that does have interaction. And you have to be the one thinking through literally every decision about how this behaves. And unless you are in a Fortune 500 company that has this already defined, you are the one thinking through, every one of those states, like whether like, if there's a pop-up that shows up about error states or whatever you have, all those different decisions, like that's on you. You have to be the one to work with engineering. And so like you have to be the one talking to them or to other teams and like okaying those decisions. Like, hey, I'd like this. This is like the ideal functionality that we know will work for users. Is this possible? And you're having a conversation and discussion with engineering or with whoever else to say this is possible or not possible. And it's like it's give and take. It's not something that like you can just push your design and that's just the way it goes. Like it's very much a collaborative process across all these different teams. And so yeah, that is definitely a big difference.
If you try to push your UX project onto the PMs and the devs, things will go wrong for you pretty quick. Yeah. You better go back in graphic design.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something I'm thinking about is like in graphic design, you obviously have the design principles, Gestalt's law, and a bunch of these famous ones that most graphic designers know. Best practices when it comes to typography, like you mentioned, Ludovic. But then when you think about the UX field, there's so many frameworks and methodologies and like, laws as well. Like there's Fitts law, there's like the double diamond process. There's like, these artifacts, like let's create the user persona, let's create a journey map. What have you noticed when you coach graphic designers in their, like, do they understand all these different UX concepts or how do they approach that?
I think what Colton and I are trying to do, and like we're trying to like be extreme about it, is helping students understand not just what UX methodologies are, but when to use them and why to use them. And that's something that we stress so much, is like making sure that graphic designers who come through our program, they understand the deep why. And why should I use a card sorting over another methodology? Why should I conduct a user interview right now? Like instead of just doing it, because it feels like a lot of portfolios out there nowadays are just a bunch of methodologies put one after another, kind of in a meaningless way. All right, it's just like, look at all my UX methodologies there. But so what? Like, right? Will the hiring manager care about that? Like, most likely not nowadays, right? They care about making sure that you pick the right methodologies for the right reasons, and that it helped you, whatever problem you were encountering. It's not, let's use all the UX methodologies we can. It's like, let's use the right one because I need to do X, Y, and Z, and that's the best one for the job, right?
Yeah. So I think one thing that we try and stress, like, everything that Ludovic just said, like the way that we talk about the UX process is vastly different than all the boot camps, because boot camps And this is like the boot camps and universities, not just boot camps, but one of the biggest problems is they teach it linearly. They teach the UX process like you need to follow these methods and these are the only ways to get there. And like if you don't do these things and you're not following UX, you're not a UX designer. And they're like really extreme about these rules that don't play out in the real world. It's really bizarre. So the way that we
talk about the ideal state.
Yeah, the ideal state, but even ideal state in like what universe? Like as in like, oh yeah, I should do all of these things. You know, like I need to go do a bunch of surveys up front to validate the idea, and then I have to talk to 20 users, and then I have to usability test someone else's product. It's like, why? So the way that we talk about it, and the way that we talk about the UX process in general, is the UX process is not a process; it's a mindset. Like, yes, it is a process in the fact that you're following, like you are basically approach the problem by like really validating that you're tackling the right problem, and then you ask yourself, what questions do I need to answer to solve this problem? And then you go do those things. Like there's no set thing that you do every time other than what problem am I solving? What questions do I need to answer? Those are the only things that you repeat. Other than that, like it's going to change. And so the way that I like to think about it is, and I just talked about this earlier on LinkedIn actually, is like you're a Kung Fu master. Like, you know, the Kung Fu masters only move as much as they need to. Like to dodge an attack or to like hit someone back, they only use as much effort as they need to, but no more. And like that's the way that like the best UX designers are. They only use the methods that they actually need to. They don't use more effort than they need to get the job done. And like in the real world, that's how it really is supposed to be, where you are not doing this superfluous stuff. You're getting the answer you need. You know you're doing the right thing, and you go that direction. And so that's what we really stress to our students is like, look, there's no such thing as like a set UX process. There's no such thing. It does not exist. What does exist is a thought process and critical thinking to get you there.
No, that's amazing. I love how you kind of, instead of having folks like go from the fear of like getting brainwashed and memorizing and mugging up the whole UX process, more of like, you know, you have a tool set, right? You have different tools. And you're like, okay, well, I have all these different tools. Which one makes sense to use where? It's kind of like I was making this amazing grilled cheese sandwich, and I have like so many different ingredients at home. That doesn't mean I gotta like shove every single ingredient in that sandwich. It's just like which ones make sense on what kind of taste I want to get.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Right?
And that's what most portfolios look like. They look like a bunch of ingredients in your grilled cheeses. Like, what the hell? Why are you using all these ingredients when you just need the cheese, the bread? That's it. No, for sure.
Yeah. It's like building a house.
Like, oh,
right?
I have popcorn. Let me throw them in there too.
Yeah. In some universes, you know, maybe, but not in this one. And like, so another way to talk about it is like building a house or like being a carpenter. Like if you're a carpenter, if you're building a table, you have a vast array of tools at your disposal, just like if you're building a house, but you'll use different tools depending on the job at your disposal, or depending on the job you're tackling. And so like, yes, all those tools are available. You could use a jackhammer to build a table. You'd be doing something really stupid, but you could, nothing's stopping you. And so the same thing applies like very much in UX. There's tools that you just don't need to use every time. And so, yeah, that's something we very much harp on all of our students. Is like, look, you need to have a reason why you're doing it. And you need to be able to justify every decision along the way because someone's paying you to do this. And if you're doing something just because and you're wasting time, they're going to be mad.
Big time. And that's something we really wondered, Colton and I. It's like, we know it's such a big problem in the industry, in the UX education industry. Like, gosh, how do we make sure that this problem doesn't keep on going, right? And how do we make sure we don't make the same mistake of just creating that templatized UX, right? UX process. And so at the end of the day, you know, like in the way we approach it currently in the program is we help students understand like what are all the UX methodologies in the first case study. They need to understand, right? They need to have an understanding of what all the UX methodologies are, get a sense of them, start to practice them. And then where the magic truly happens is the second case study, because then they have free reign. They know all of it. They understand it enough because they just practice it on one case study for many, many weeks prior. And then it's really up to them for the second case study to be more creative with the UX process, more flexible, to adapt themselves a little bit more and to pick the right methodologies for the right reasons. And so that's where we see lights turn on and be like, oh, now I understand. And like, I thought that I need to conduct interviews, but I don't because X, Y, and Z. And you see things happening in students' mind. And every time we see that, we're like, yes, we've done it right.
Yes.
How do you
Yeah.
how do you tackle the portfolio problem? Because there's just so many generic portfolios that are flooding the market, and a lot of them are like, what is this? Like, this is not even a portfolio. Like, but people are just creating because you're like, oh, you need to have a portfolio to get a job. So, what do you advise your students when it comes to creating like a portfolio project?
You start 6 months before. So right from the beginning of the program, like if you start thinking of your portfolio once your case studies are over, you already lost half of the battle. You should be thinking of your portfolio from day one. And the reason for that
Yeah.
is because the way we teach our students to do it is to have a very specific positioning, their own positioning, not just a general, hey, I'm a UX designer, I love to solve solutions for people, right? Like, sure, like, but every other UX designer does that. So what else are you here for, right? Like, what's your unique value proposition? What do you put on the table that another UX designer wouldn't put on the table, right? What makes you as a UX designer? And so that's one of the things that even before the program starts, we help them to pick the right case studies and envision themselves as to like what type of industry would they like to work in like 7 months from now. What type of UX designer would they like to be? Maybe they don't really have a specific industry in mind. And so then can you niche down as to maybe you want to be a desktop designer, maybe you want to be a mobile designer. Just that alone can help, because then if you know that you want to work for mobile, then you're going to just work on UX case studies targeted for mobile. Or if you know that you love working for the travel industry, for mobile specifically too, let's say, right, like you can niche down twice, then great, you're gonna target case studies that have to do with travel and mobile. And then when you position yourself on your homepage, then you can have a very unique positioning that no one else is gonna have out there. And that's a huge piece of how we have students get started thinking about what the end goal is going to look like 6 months from now. So that's where it starts.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big differences, and one of the things we push for sure is making sure that they are niching down and being specific, because kind of like if you're going to solve any problem out there, you always look for the most specific solution to your problem. And so the same thing applies when someone's looking to hire someone, right? Like they want someone with that skill set and expertise and knowledge, industry knowledge that someone else might not have. And so like if a student has put in 2 to 3 case studies on, let's say, the travel industry, like what Ludovic's talking about, like they're going to have more experience already in that space and understanding that space than someone else who hasn't. And so someone who's hiring for a company like that is more likely to hire someone from, who has that expertise. So that's one piece that we do. The second thing is, once we actually get to the portfolio, there's 2 things that we really focus on. The first is storytelling. The biggest problem with 99% of portfolios out there is their checklist. And that's because that's what universities and bootcamps teach. They teach it to be a checklist. And that's, again, kind of coming back to your grilled cheese example. It's like, okay, I'm going to use grilled cheese, or I'm going to do cheese, and I'm going to do mayo for some reason. And I'm going to do, pepper, and then paprika, and then all the spices. And then I'm going to throw in, pickles for some reason. And it's like this checklist of things that they think they need to do. And so that's what they write their case study like. Is that exactly? You was right. And that's the same exact experience that most people have, is they have this wall of information and most of it is superfluous to the problem. Whereas what we teach our students is to tell a story. So in that story, the product is the hero and so are they. Like it is equally important to make themselves a hero in that story, because they are growing and learning throughout the entire time. Like how were they when they started? Like what did they know? Were they nervous about the project? Were they excited? Like what did they learn along the way? It's kind of, it's following that kind of classic hero's journey, but it's not only for the product, but for them. And so we teach them this like storytelling process, and like really focusing on telling that really good story of how it started, context, and then the new normal once it's ended. And then on top of that, really infusing their personality throughout the entire portfolio. Because the thing is if anyone took a step back and thought about their favorite lesson that they've ever learned, or their favorite content, what's the thing that keeps them engaged? I can guarantee you humor and personality are built into it. Like I can tell you, for example, my favorite professor in college was incredibly engaging because he was funny, but he also, like, you could tell he was passionate, and he had put his personality into every lecture he gave. And the same thing goes for my favorite high school teacher. Like, he was a really funny guy, put all that kind of personality into every single lesson. And I remember his lessons because of it. I remember all that stuff. And it kept me engaged on the topics that would be otherwise boring. And so the same thing applies to your portfolio. Like, by injecting your personality throughout, by using language that you would use with your friends, that automatically separates you from the other ones out there who are writing it like a textbook. Now, like, I'm not saying to, like, not include a filter on what you're saying and to write it like make it sound stupid, or, you know, make it sound uneducated. That's not it at all. But it is about injecting fun, or at least you, into your work. And so I think by doing all of those things for our students, when they do all those things, are the ones who are seeing success, because not only is their portfolio honed and specifically targeting an industry, if they've decided to go that direction, but they also are telling a story rather than just writing a checklist, and they're putting their personality throughout their portfolio. And so it's a massive difference.
That changes the game. Seriously, everything we've talked about, like, I don't know why more portfolios don't do this, but it's like the top 5% of portfolios do this. And then the other 90% is like completely out there, just like putting a bunch of methodologies one after another. Another 5% is like a little bit in between. It's like, gosh, like, it's just a little bit more. Actually, it's not that much more. It's actually less work. But it's just like doing work that matters versus just putting all the work that you've done. It's a bit like, you know, when you were a kid at school and you're like, oh, you know, you have an essay. I'm going to write as many pages as I can, and then they're going to love it because it's going to be so long. It's going to be so impressive. And then you get, you know, a F because it was completely irrelevant. But you wrote 10 pages and you were proud of it. You're like, gosh, I put so much and I have a F, right? It's a bit the same. It's like, it's not in the quantity, in the number of case studies, in all this stuff. That's nonsense. That's also another thing we see online a lot. You have to have 4 case studies. You have to have 5 case studies. Yeah, why not 10 or why not 20, right? So much rather have like 2 case studies, 3 case studies max, super well done to the max, where you know every single design decision that you've made, everything with story, with personality, all that stuff, well packaged, will stand out. There is no doubt.
Before this episode, I kind of had done a cohort operation and talked to a graphic designer who is now working in the UX design space, just to kind of understand. The prompt that I asked this person was, what are the challenges that you see now? I mean, now that you're in the industry, like, you know, working in it. And I'm just going to like paraphrase what they said. And it was something along the lines of, when they were working in graphic design, regardless of who the client was, majority of their time was spent on doing the graphic design work, creating the artifacts, creating the marketing material. And, you know, they kind of fell in love with that, just spending majority of the time doing that. Now, working in a big company with a big UX team, and especially in a space where they don't like it. So let's say you're working in you know, insurance, or, you know, finance or something like that, like very like old school kind of stuff, in a big company on the UX team. So it's not like you're creating everything from scratch. It's also like, it's very regulated also. So it's like, you can't just like do whatever you want. And they said that it's very hard for them sometimes, because they don't necessarily love the product or the space the company's in. And then because now a significant portion of their time is not just spent on doing the actual design work, is also like doing all these other things, like, you know, like talking to people, meetings, getting buy-ins and stuff. So they were finding that a little bit challenging. And I was kind of wondering if you had any advice for that.
Yeah, in terms of like just making the switch in terms of how they are reacting to the work types, you know, I think it just requires a shift in mindset. I mean, I think first of all, one of the things to know just in general, and this is actually a big reason why a lot of graphic designers make the switch into UX, is like, if you look at the career ladder for a graphic designer, like, it doesn't go very high, right? Like you have creative director, you might have senior creative director, and then like maybe one or two other steps, but there's really not a lot. It's like graphic designer, senior graphic designer, creative director, one or two other rungs. And then maybe if you're lucky, there's some sort of like VP of design in your company, maybe. And yeah, so like that's problem A. And then whereas on the UX side, there's significantly more rungs on that ladder that like as far as career growth. And so the reason this matters though is because as a graphic designer, if you're focused, I think the part of the reason is because graphic designers are focused on outputs and they're focused on deliverables. Whereas with UX, it's far more strategic. Like there's a lot more things that you're doing that can affect the company's bottom line. Like your work as a graphic designer, like likely will not affect the company's bottom line. Maybe on a certain campaign, it might not do as well, or maybe it'll do slightly better because of the creative that you created. Yes, that is definitely true. But like, there's not as much strategic thinking and strategic decision-making that happens by a long shot in graphic design compared to UX. And so I think understanding that if you're making the move from graphic design into UX, there's going to be far more of the kind of, analytical tasks that you have to do, like the research tasks. There's going to be just more of that left-brained type activity that you'll be doing versus just only creative. So don't get me wrong, like a UX design in general is a very creative career. And that's what makes it so much fun is like there is so much creativity involved. And there's also a lot of analytical, like just straight thinking type activities that you'll be doing. And so I think as far as like advice that I'd give, it'd be, enjoy the time that you get to do the more creative activities. And also like revel in the fact that you don't have to deal with as much stakeholder subjectivity likely because you're going to be using those left-brained activities to be able to back up your design decisions. And just in general, I think enjoy the process as much as you can, and like find ways to really express that creativity in what you're doing. I think that's probably the advice I'd give because and this is coming full circle with what we talked about. Like this is one of the reasons why UX is so different than graphic design. They don't expect it. It's that overconfidence. They think they know what they're going to be doing and they don't actually do the same things. It's the exact full circle in the conversation right back there. I think it very much applies. Ludovic, what would you say, man?
I mean, yeah, everything you said, it's just, it's 100% right. Like it is a different job at the end of the day, right? It's like, we're not going to lie, like, even though there is the word design in both of them, and that's the appeal for a lot of graphic designers out there. It's like, I need to still be creative, yet I want my career to be a bit more diverse in what I do. I don't want to just do some deliverables, some assets. I want to have a say. I want to be a decision maker. I want to be respected. I want to make sure that when I tell stakeholders that I made a design decision for a very specific reason, it's not because just of me, it's because of me, it's because of the testing, it's because of all the discussions I had with the stakeholders. And then using the data as a wrapper to help communicate everything that you've done, help communicate the outcome of your designs and all the things that make up a successful user experience, right? And so it might be a bit frustrating at first because there are a lot more moving pieces than in graphic design. And that's also probably why UX designers are paid more, is because there is more to do. There is more to connect. There is a bit more like, a PM, they have to connect with the C-suite, they have to connect with the devs, with the designers, with the project managers. It's a bit the same. In UX, you also have to connect with your PM, with your devs. That's roughly it, right? Sometimes you might talk to sales here and there if you want to, or if that's useful. But most of the time, you are a connector, and you are here as a product team together to make decisions. And making decisions is not always easy, and it requires a lot of back and forth. And so that's what the UX career addresses. It's not just the outcome, not just the deliverable, but it's a full-on process. It's a full-on discussion. It's a full-on activity that's very teamwork oriented. And so, yeah, obviously you'll be sitting at your computer, you'll still be making designs, yet you'll also be standing and drawing user flows here and there and talking to teammates about it. You will be in meetings to try to better understand the business goals, the technical limitations, all these things, right? But it makes it challenging, but it also makes it extremely fun and rewarding. And the last thing that I want to tell them is like, well, as a UX designer, the thing to remember is that you never stuck, right? You never, if let's say that you start as a generalist, and we tell our students that they should be starting as generalists, well, then in the future, in let's say 2 years from now, you're like, you know what, I have a very strong passion for prototyping. And great, you can take on prototyping to the next level, potentially learn how to code and create some live code prototypes or whatnot, right? Like you could do more visual design things, more design system things. Or you could become a researcher, right? And say like, fuck all this, I just want to do the research part and I don't want it to have anything to do with designs anymore, right? And so in the UX world, there is so much flexibility and you can truly design your own career that makes sense to you and you only. And that's what I found super excited about the career. Never ever stuck.
Oh my God. I love that answer. I'm going to be entering both your contact information. So for graphic designers listening to this, is it cool if they just reach out to you and send you a message to both of you?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
If they're thinking of switching to UX?
Yeah.
Awesome. Ludovic and Colton, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us, man. We've had so much fun and it's been awesome getting to know you better. And just quick shout out with Paramahansa Yogananda and Autobiography of a Yogi. That I knew that Jay Neal and I were going to be good friends, and we had that conversation. So,
hell yeah.